What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to our first matchup show of the season. Game one for the BC Lions is here when they host the Edmonton Elks this Saturday, June 7th, in BC Place for their season opener. But not only is it their season opener, of course, all the anticipation, the hype has been built up for their fourth annual concert kickoff to start the season. And of course, it is headlined by Snoop Dogg. Of course, there's many opinions on that, myself being super excited for the opening act and then the football game. It is going to be a good weekend and, of course, an exciting matchup show to talk about this upcoming game. Getting into it, or before we get into it, I guess I should say, of course, folks, if you guys are enjoying all of our content, we've been busy uploading our kickoff show with Farhan Lalji of TSN. Of course, we uploaded last week our schedule predictions for the BC Lions, Blake and I. And then Blake and I just recorded and uploaded our top five storylines / roster, final roster reaction on the channel as well. This will be up a little bit later in the week. By the time you guys are watching this, it will be Thursday or later in the week. We're going to be uploading this Thursday. And as I said on our roster reaction / storylines to follow, the schedule that you guys can get used to seeing from Blake and I, or myself if Blake's not able to attend, like it looks like it's going to be for this week. The matchup show will be released the 2 days before the game. So the game being played on a Saturday, we're going to release it Thursday evening, probably around 4:30 or 5 p.m. Pacific time. Give the folks the evening before and then the day before, and then of course hopefully the morning of going into the game, a chance to hear the pregame matchup show where we will be joined by a special guest here momentarily. And that special guest for the week is one Andrew Hoskins, host of the Turf District podcast. So shout out to Andrew for jumping on. Andrew has been very gracious of his time in the past of jumping on here, not only contributing to our CFL mock draft live stream every year, but jumping on here for things like this, previews, breakdowns, you name it, for the Edmonton Elks. Andrew has always been very gracious of his time. So Andrew will join us for about 20 minutes to talk Edmonton Elks in about 5 or 10 minutes time. And like I said, today is the first matchup show you guys are tuning in and listening to. So there's a ton of storylines. We'll get into our initial thoughts here before Andrew joins us. After Andrew gets out of here, we're going to go into a little bit of a breakdown for our BC Lions offense versus Edmonton Elks defense, and then vice versa, the BC Lions defense versus the Edmonton Elks offense. And then normally Blake will give us 3 keys towards the end of the game, and we'll give an injury report. Seeing as that we are recording on a Monday, uploading it on Thursday, it is quite early in the week we are recording, just due to scheduling busyness in our scheduling. Having to record on a Monday is having to work out this week. So normally we would give an injury report. Normally, maybe typically recording on a Wednesday or Tuesday night, having at least a day or two of practice to go off of in terms of an injury report, depth charts, or an idea. So we don't have any of those tonight for the matchup show, but make sure you guys are stay tuned on our social media channels. Of course, you guys can find us below at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram, at _CF Fanatics on Twitter or X. We'll be able to repost all of the Lions depth charts and things like that, give our opinions over on our social media channels. You can find me on Twitter as well at Cole McGarvey. And we'll be giving our opinions throughout the week on game day, of course. And then, like I said, stay tuned for more updates in terms of post-game shows, things like that. So let's get into the game a little bit in terms of initial thoughts. Some of my initial thoughts are that this is, I think, going to be a pretty fun and exciting matchup in terms of entertainment. I think both offenses are going to be able to go back and forth. Could it be, for the first time ever, 2 Canadian quarterbacks starting for their respective franchises in week number 1 going head-to-head? From what few research that I've done so far, obviously going to look into a little bit more throughout the week, I believe it is going to be the first time where going into the game, both Canadian quarterbacks are starters. I think in the past that previous Canadian quarterbacks have played against each other in a game, but I think for the first time it will be Trey Ford versus Nathan Rourke, 2 Canadian quarterbacks starting in week number 1 of the CFL. I think that is a very juicy storyline to follow, along with Canadian talent, I think, in this game. When you look at the BC Lions, who obviously the last few years have been gifted the extra second round pick for playing Canadian snaps for their Canadian talent, they obviously believe in. When you look on their side of the ball, when you start with obviously Nathan Rourke, Justin McInnes, Matthew Betts, Javon Katoy, Ben Haladic, Christian Covington. I think there's a few other guys that are maybe going to hopefully prove themselves with Christophe Beaulieu and potentially maybe along that offensive line. Hopefully when Anna Una gets healthy and stuff like that. So when you look at Edmonton as well, with obviously the Ford brothers, Curly Gittins Jr., all the additions on defense with Royce Mechie and Robbie Smith and a few of those other guys on defense. I think it's going to be a fun one in terms of Canadian talent on the field as well. Another juicy storyline I think to follow from a BC Lions standpoint is obviously the how well the Lions have done, I guess. The success the Lions have had against the Edmonton Elks has been a promising one going in. When you look at the last few years, I'll talk about it a little bit maybe before Andrew hops on here, but 8-2 versus Edmonton Elks since 2021, post COVID basically. So when you look at the success versus Edmonton, I think that's another one in terms of this is a new Edmonton Elks team with a new voice, obviously with Mark Kilam, and I think that's another storyline as well with the two first-time head coaches going at it with Mark Kilam leading the Edmonton Elks, and then you look at Buck Pierce, who's going to be leading the BC Lions. And then I think, like I was just kind of alluding to, how improved as well as how different is the Edmonton Elks team of the past of, being very good, losing some of these one-score games, I think being better team than their record indicates. Does this new voice kind of rejuvenate Edmonton? And we'll see what happens in terms of that aspect. I've been high on Edmonton here in a little bit of pass, maybe to get a little bit of a Edmonton chat here before Andrew jumps on and joins us. And I couldn't get as high as I've been in the past on Edmonton this season, but still high on them. I think they're going to be able to find a way in the playoffs in terms of a crossover. But before we get to Andrew, of course, folks, a few last reminders. Of course, if you guys are tuning in on YouTube, please feel free to like the video, comment down below. Most importantly, if you guys could smash the subscribe button for us. We are closing in on 400 subscribers, which we'd be graciously appreciative if we can hit that before kickoff on Thursday. Even on Saturday, we will take. As well as if you could follow us on our social media platforms. Of course, you guys can find us at Canadian Football Fanatics and at _CF Fanatics on Twitter as well. So the guest of the hour has joined us. We're going to bring in one Andrew Hoskins, the host of the Turf District podcast. Andrew, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, and always excited to come in. And hey, we're talking about real bullets, real games this week. So, best time of the year, right?
Yes, as I was saying before you jumped on, it is football season. We have actual football to talk about, and you've been so graciously hopping on here over the years of not only our CFL mock draft show that we do every year, but things like this with our previews and stuff like that. So always a good time when we're able to have Andrew on and chat some CFL football, and especially when our two teams match up, which is in week number 1. So Andrew, before we get into the matchup of teams on the field, I know you are making the trip, I believe, out west, and obviously with all the anticipation, all the excitement built up of not only the season opener with the concert kickoff and stuff like that. I'm sure you're a fan of who's playing before the game, but
Yep.
How are you feeling about coming out west and obviously seeing the kind of the new era of the Edmonton Elks as well?
This is I think this is my third time out of the last 4 years that I am coming out for that game, because it seems that the Elks tend to be the ones playing BC Lions in the first week of the season, and it's always a great trip. Lots of great BC Lions fans welcome us in, and I say it's always a great trip. It hasn't always been a very good game as far as I'm concerned, but for BC Lions fans, it's great. But I really love the concert kickoff series. It just feels like it's a real kickoff to the season, and it just gets so exciting to be there with everybody waiting for their team to show up, and what kind of team is going to show up, right? So I love the trip. I love being there, and for the first game, I get excited just because it gives that opportunity to see what is this team going to do now? Like this year, obviously with the Elks, there's been so many changes. I don't expect it to be super smooth right out of the gate, but I am excited to see what this team can bring based on the different coaches and the new players and where we're at. So it's just an exciting thing to get into.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was saying before, we've had you on plenty, and dating back to our off-season preview, our primer, later, I believe it was actually later last year, if we're being correct, but
Yep.
when things were official, kind of getting your opinion of the moves that were made and stuff like that. But now that you've had a chance, I know taking training camp and stuff like that, preseason games, what are some things that maybe you're looking out for and kind of with some anticipation building? I'm sure with obviously Mark Kilam taking over at head coach, Ed Harvey making the moves at the top, and then obviously with the addition of Chris Morris, a guy that understands the history and stuff like that with Edmonton, and I think really kind of putting the Elks in the right direction here going forward. And then obviously with Trey Ford kind of being given the keys to start the season. Obviously, out throughout the past few years, he's had some playing time, but not really kind of given the keys to the franchise. So, kind of, what are some things that you're looking forward to, especially with week number one? I know you mentioned maybe some working out the kinks, but just for some Edmonton fans that are maybe viewing, or just CFL fans in general, what are you kind of looking out for in terms of some of the new faces that are leading the franchise?
Well, it's funny, I think a lot of people will focus on talking about Trey Ford, and don't get me wrong, Trey Ford is super exciting, and he's a big part of where this team is going to go. But I got to say, after attending training camp and watching how some of these interactions are going, I am very excited to see the front seven of this defense play together on a regular basis. They basically overhauled the defensive line, bringing back it's Jake Serezna, which is a fantastic addition back. He got to go to Toronto for 1 year, get a Grey Cup, come back, and now he can win one here. That's fantastic. He brought his buddies Robbie Smith and Jared Brinkman with him. Brinkman has been described as another version of Almondo Sewell. So just a fiery big dude that likes to move people around. And so to me, seeing those kind of guys, I'm not even sure who's going to play the other corner, if it's going to be Kongbo or if it's going to be Brandon Barlow, possibly Noah Taylor. Like they've all had some good sights in that fourth spot. But then you go back one level and you end up with Niles Morgan, Nick Anderson, and right now Cordell Jackson, who has been playing the Sam position, who has just been a speedster and a great cover guy, but also seems to be very good at stopping the run. So I am really excited to see those front seven gel. And in the preseason game, we saw, the first drive. Rourke had a lot of time, moved his way down the field, got his touchdown, or got a field goal, I mean. And we're thinking, okay, but then as that second quarter started, you could see them starting to get to know how they're going to play together. And I think that's going to be a very, very exciting part of this team. And I know not everybody loves defense, but I sure love a good defensive battle. So to me, that's very, very exciting. And then we'll go back now to Trey Ford, who of course brings another dynamic. And again, like you said, he's been handed the keys. Go show us what you can do. They improved the offensive line by bringing back David Beard and brought over Gregor McKellar from Toronto. I think, and Martez Ivy should have been the offensive lineman of the year last year. He can only get better. If they start opening some holes when you've got Justin Rankin, Javon Lake, and Trey Ford that are able to run down the field, that's going to be a fun part to see how they put that together and how Jordan Maximic will actually use that, knowing that he's not usually big on running, but he does have some targets down the field as well. When you talk about Stephen Dunbar and Arkell Smith and Yeah, we call KGJ and KJG. You know, we've got a lot of guys, and we haven't even talked about the guy that I think is probably going to be the breakout player for this year, which is Zach Mathis. You know, 6'7" receiver. You can't teach height or arms width, and that guy has plenty. I'm very excited for Trey to just lob one up into the end zone for him and see if anybody can top the ball over that guy. So lots of exciting moves. Like I said, I with it being a new defensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, I wonder if there'll be some time where they're going to take some time to kind of gel, but once they get going, it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned the additions. We've kind of been joking over here with our weekly show of, the Edmonton Argos with the three additions up front there with obviously Brinkman and Serezna and Robbie Smith coming over. But talking about those additions and as a whole, we could even talk about, your Canadian talent. And obviously over here with the Canadian Football Fanatics, we love to focus on the Canadian branded talent with the additions of, Royce Mechie and Robbie Smith, as I mentioned, and some of those guys coming over with obviously Trey Ford being an addition in the offseason, Trey being his brother, Curly, as you mentioned, as well as Keon Julian Graham. What are kind of, or maybe just an individual Canadian out of maybe some of them, or even some of your offensive linemen as well, with obviously the talent you have up front as well, a Canadian or two that you're excited to watch for the Edmonton Elks this season?
Well, the funny thing is, Mike and I, Mike's co-host of my show, we were sitting down chatting the other day, and we figured that they could be starting up to 10 or 11 Canadians on this team. So Ed Hervey is not messing around with trying to go after that Canadian draft pick, and I think that he specifically built it that way because it's not like it's just all linemen. It's everywhere on the field, right? So we're in just the offense and defense. We were talking 4 on the offensive line, possibly 3 receivers now as Canadians. Tyrell Ford, like you talked about on the corner, Royce Metier in the as the safety. I mean that's 9 Canadians. Like it's, and then Robbie Smith, of course, on the line. So you're talking 10 Canadians that are all playing in big roles. So there's a ton of Canadians to watch on this team. I really do want to see what Tyrell Ford will be like in his kind of second full year. We saw what he did last year in Winnipeg. I'm excited to see what he brings to this team, and if he can, bring even a half to 3/4 of what he brought to Winnipeg. That's better than what we had in our secondary last year. So very excited to see what he will do on the field. And I've already mentioned him, but Zach Mathis is also a Canadian. And it's those are guys that I would be definitely keeping an eye on this season. Oh, you muted yourself there, Mick.
Sorry, Andrew.
Okay.
I didn't know Mathis was a Canadian as well either. I know I heard you guys chatting about him on your weekly show as well. But with the Canadian talent, you talked about maybe potentially starting, 10. We've seen here with the luxury of doing that in the BC Lions of obviously the extra pick that comes with that of, playing your Canadians, playing those valuable snaps as well. So I know you also talked about on your guys' show, I believe last week, of the brotherly battle you guys have been watching of, when Terrell Ford makes a play on Trey and Trey when he's, getting a completion on Terrell, them pushing each other, obviously, which is, I'm sure, a fun thing to watch up in training camp and throughout the season. I'm sure will be fun. Speaking about Trey, Andrew, I know you kind of alluded to it already. It's been, I'm sure, the number one topic that outside of the new regime and stuff like that, it's always about Trey and when is it going to be Trey's time? And now that it is, I'm just curious if you can kind of maybe just quickly, why is this the year that kind of Trey Ford puts his stamp on things and kind of makes things go for the Edmonton Elks this year as the franchise quarterback?
Well, I think that I think a lot of people would say, and I can't disagree with them, that he probably should have been in a lot more games beforehand with some of the different quarterbacks that we've had. I understood the idea behind it in trying to make sure that he could learn how to be that starting quarterback, that he could learn how to take that pressure in a team like Edmonton that has this history of winning and a high expectation from the fan base. You have to be able to handle that, right? And that's part of the learning process, and I could see that. Do I think he should have played more? Absolutely. I think in this particular scenario, though, it's time not only because he is ready, he's ready to start taking that on. And is there going to probably be a couple of bumps and bruises? Sure, he's still young and learning, but I believe this coaching staff has full confidence in his ability, and they're not prepared to have anything hanging over his head like you could be pulled at any minute. And I think that would be a big difference for him. He needs that confidence boost, because when he's riding high with his confidence, he plays very, very well. So I think this is why in this particular moment he's the right guy and it's the right time. Could it have been earlier? Yes, but would he have the same support? I'm not entirely sure.
For sure. Like I said, we rep the Canadians harder than anybody and are rooting for Trey, but obviously I think everyone's kind of been realistic. I know yourself with, there has been some ups and downs of, when he does get starting time, and we're obviously outside of maybe week one and a few other weeks rooting for Trey, obviously to have some success this year. And in the past we've been, myself maybe speaking before Blake of, picking Edmonton to finish third last season and been high hopes for Edmonton. So rooting for Edmonton outside of course, when we match up against each other. And of course, the Canadians can't help but root for them as well. But Andrew, when talking about the matchup, what are some things that you're looking forward to on the field when it comes to Edmonton versus BC on Saturday?
Well, I think the kind of the marquee matchup at this point is going to be Edmonton's defense against BC's offense. We saw that Rourke is starting to get comfortable again. We know how good he can be. We know that he has some weapons. When you talk about Hatcher and Berryhill and these guys that they know they can get down the field to. So I think that's going to be a huge matchup in this game. And in the past, well, the other times that I've been there, it always ends up that that offense scores a lot of points, and we don't score so many. So I think that's going to be a real key matchup, and especially that BC offensive line versus the Edmonton defensive line. I think if there's some pressure there, I know Nathan Rourke can break out and definitely get around guys, but can they can that front four of Edmonton or that front seven of Edmonton get enough pressure on him to make him have to think about it a bit more? And as soon as he has to think about it, one of those guys in the backfield might be jumping. So I think that's kind of where I'm going to be focusing. The secondary focus, though, is going to be on the special teams. Edmonton has been not so special teams for many years, and we it's very much catch the ball and fall down, like there's not a return. Our cover teams have always been decent, but we're going in right now with a basically rookie kicker, who again is being shown lots of confidence, which is fantastic, and he does have a leg on him. He needs to be able to show what he can do in a game situation, and we need to see. I want to see that Mark Kilam effect, where his focus over so many years has been special teams. I'm excited for him to bring that to this team and for us to see that difference. And even in the preseason, we saw a couple of much better returns. We saw some decent covers here and there. Granted, they were rotating a lot of guys, but I'm curious to see that special teams battle back and forth. If Edmonton can start to kind of win some of that field position, that makes it a little bit easier on Trey and the offense as they're trying to learn each other. So that'll be the part that I'll be watching, is those two sections of the game.
For sure. I'm glad you mentioned that matchup of Edmonton's defensive line versus BC's offensive line. I think all eyes in BC are probably on that matchup as well, especially with all the additions up front for Edmonton, and even as you mentioned, that kind of front six with some of those guys in the linebacking core as well. So, Andrew, last question before we get you out of here: what are some kind of realistic or even your expectations long term, just kind of for the season, not for a few years, but just long term for the season for Edmonton this year?
You know what? After watching them in practice and watching how they're doing the teaching and how some of these guys are starting to come into their own. Injuries are going to happen throughout the season. Things are going to rotate around a bit, but I'd be really happy if they could get to an 8-10 or a 9-9 season, and I think that's doable with where we're at. I do think that they've got to start focusing a bit more on winning those battles, and we've last year we got off to an awful start and lost a whole bunch of games, 3 of them in a row by a walk-off field goal. You win any one of those, it changes a bit of the momentum in that locker room, and next thing you know, you are talking about a 500 season. So for us, I'm thinking that that's a realistic goal. If they can go higher than that, I mean, outstanding. But I really think it's probably good to aim for that 500, and hopefully that squeaks us into that third spot, and we actually get a playoff game again.
I would love to see it, Andrew. Good news. I predicted anyways, although my predictions aren't always the best, but I got you guys 8-10
Okay.
in fourth, but crossing over to the east. So a
All
playoff
right.
game for Edmonton is coming this year. Let's maybe talk it into existence. Andrew, before we get you out of here, of course, you mentioned that you guys are busy recording your guys' show this week. You guys do a ton of content. You guys are fabulous with all the tailgating scene over in Edmonton and stuff that you guys do over there. So a ton of props to you guys. Obviously, super fan and commish. So tell the people where they can find you guys, all your work on YouTube and stuff like that, social media, and what they can expect from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the props, man. I appreciate
Of course.
that. And we've been around doing this for a while. This is our 11th season, so we should be like reasonably good at it. I don't know, but decent anyway. We usually record on a Tuesday night. You can catch us live on YouTube or Twitch, or you can catch the show afterwards on YouTube, or of course any of your audio spots for your podcast. Then as far as the games go, we're around usually 3 hours before the game with some kind of tailgate. If you're headed to Edmonton, please come early. We want to feed you. We don't care what colors you wear. Come hang out with us at the tailgate, and we'll talk some football before the game gets going.
Yes, you are always gracious to the CFL family. Andrew, I know you're a CFL fan first and foremost. Is there anything that
Yes.
maybe comes off the top of your mind of like maybe a CFL storyline you're looking forward to this year outside of the Elks? It could even be the Elks. Is there anything kind of that jumps to your mind? You're just excited, I'm sure, for CFL football to be back on your TV screen again.
Oh, 100%. But there's a couple storylines. I'm from Edmonton, so I'm always very happy when Calgary's at the bottom of the West. So I'm be very happy if that storyline happened. I love you, all of my Calgary friends, but I'm very happy when your team sucks for a while, just because we need to even it out a bit. So I'd be fine with that. One that I'm really keeping an eye on, though, is Ottawa. They are very intriguing to me, and I feel like Ottawa is in a good spot to have a great season, and I'm very excited to see how they move forward this season. I think Drew Brown, second year in the same system, he's got even a few more weapons around him. I think that's a storyline that I'm going to be intrigued to watch. Just like I'll be watching, of course, the Elks this season, but next year even closer, because it'll be that continuity and see how that comes over. So I think that's where my I would keep my eyes, I guess, on a good storyline. Well, it's always good when Calgary's last, but a good storyline would be Ottawa, and watch what they can do this season.
I love that Battle of Alberta. Speaking of that, Alberta, though, we can agree on this, Andrew, or we should at least. I know Blake probably doesn't, but we should all be going for oil country, especially Wednesday night. Hopefully, they're able to bring back a Stanley Cup to Canada. I know, I know, I'm maybe in the minority of a lot of Canadians not wanting to see that, but me never seeing a Canadian team bring a Stanley Cup back to Canada, I for one will be rooting for Edmonton. That being said, Andrew, this is a football show, so we'll save the hockey talk for another day. We'll do this again when Edmonton and BC clash again. Andrew, appreciate you for jumping on as always.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man, and go Oilers.
Of course. That was one Andrew Hoskins, host of the Turf District podcast. So thankful for Andrew always jumping on here and being gracious of his time and talking some CFL football. Looking forward to the matchup this weekend. So now for the next about half an hour or so, folks, we're going to get into BC Lions offense versus Edmonton Elks defense, and then vice versa. We're going to go BC Lions defense versus Edmonton Elks offense. As I said, normally we'd give Blake's three keys as well as kind of an injury report and then get out of here. Blake not being with me tonight, we're going to have to adjust things on the fly. So let's get into it with the BC Lions offense versus the Edmonton Elks defense. As Andrew just said, he thinks that's one of the things he's kind of watching in this matchup is that, front seven of Edmonton versus the BC Lions offensive line and just the offense in general. And probably something where we should start is the bread and butter of the BC Lions this season. And I think under Buck Pierce will be, some early run game, wanting to set up that run game to establish it, to use their bread and butter, or use Buck Pierce's bread and butter, we should say, of setting up that play action, deep shots, getting the defense to come forward, bite down hard on the run, and then getting their receivers deep behind them. And I think you have to go first and establish the run to be able to set up that play action, as well as just be able to, I think, kind of have success in what Buck wants to do, especially if we're trying to run the ball early and not have success in the CFL game. As you know, folks, with only having the 2 downs to get first downs, can be a lot of 2 and outs, can be a lot of punts early on. If you're only getting, say, 1 or 2 yards back to the line of scrimmage on first down, setting yourself up in third and long, third and medium, putting things into a little bit of a harder situation. Obviously, you can come away with, maybe a 5-yard hook, but just being out of that range, I think that comfortability of, second and 5 is probably a manageable down and distance for Nathan Rourke in the offense. Obviously, things aren't going to be ideal every down, and you're going to have to expect Nathan to pick up a 2nd and 10 every now and then, and maybe even a 2nd and 15 and even longer, right? But I think first and foremost is going to have to be establishing the run against that front 7, as Andrew was saying, of, Robbie Smith, Jake Serezna, Jared Brinkman, possibly Oakman, and some other guys in rotation at the other defensive end position. When you look at the linebacker position with Nick Anderson, reigning Rookie of the Year in the CFL, as well as Niles Morgan, both had 100-plus tackles last season. Both guys that fly around, play with some physicality on defense. I think guys that will want to answer the bell early on in terms of physicality, and if the BC Lions are wanting to run the ball, I think hopefully getting up on them and being physical with them early on sets the tone. The BC Lions are able to take advantage early and take advantage of that defense. So, of course, we probably should have started, or you'd probably maybe think I would have started with QB1, Nathan Rourke, and I'm excited to see what he looks like back in regular season action this season. After last season not going the way things um, went, maybe not going the way things, I thought, with probably a little bit of unfair expectations league wide, me being, one of them, in terms of not being hard on him after he wasn't performing well enough, but in terms of thinking he would just kind of seamlessly transition back into the CFL game. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Nathan Rourke does this season. I think I am as high on him as anybody is. I think could be a legit MOP candidate. I just don't know if he can help his team win enough games to secure that honor in terms of being, I think, the best quarterback in the league this year. That also has to come with getting enough wins, being either probably the 1 seed. I don't know if being the 2 seed in the Western Division will get it done. We'll see what happens come season end, although I don't want to rush things because how fast things are flying. Let's maybe slow down before we try to speed things up. That being said, Nathan Rourke, as Andrew alluded to as well, 3-0 versus Edmonton Elks in 2022, and absolutely lit them on fire with what he did against them. I do have the stats here if I'm able to pull them up quickly. So in 3 games in 2022, the BC Lions were a win in the season concert kickoff, 59-15 over the Edmonton Elks. They also won 46-14 and also won 31-14, putting up a lot of points. What is that? Quick math. 70, 77, 66, 137. 137 points scored. I know there were some pick sixes in there as well. That was some quick mental math, folks. Correct me down in the comments if I'm wrong, if I'm right. at what I said, as I believe 137 is what I just said. If I was wrong of the first number that I said, that's what I want to go with. If I'm right, that was quick mental math for the kid there. That being said, Nathan Rourke, besides the 130 plus points in those 3 games that we're going to go with, he had 1,255 total yards, along with 15 touchdowns in 3 games. I repeat, Nathan Rourke in 3 games in 2022 versus Edmonton Elks had a total of 1,255 yards passing and rushing, as well as a total of 15 touchdowns passing and rushing in 3 total games versus the Edmonton Elks in 2022. Not only is Nathan Rourke hot versus the Edmonton Elks, or have their number, I should say, right now. As I said earlier, the BC Lions are 8-2 versus the Edmonton Elks since 2021. I can go back with the history of win losses here, with Edmonton winning the first matchup in 2021, 21-16. BC won the second and last matchup in 2021, 43-10. As I mentioned, in 2022, BC won all 3, starting with the first one, 59-15, 46-14, and 31-14. In 2023, BC won 22-0, 27-0 in the first 2 matchups, so they shut them out. Edmonton didn't score a point in the first 2 matchups. And then BC also won the third matchup, sweeping them in back-to-back years, 37-29. And then in 2024, BC also won 24-21, and then lost the second one, which I believe was the Vernon Adams. I don't know if Vernon Adams was in the lineup for that one. 33-16 lost to Edmonton in the second and final matchup last season, for a grand total of 8 wins for the BC Lions and 2 wins for the Edmonton Elks since 2021. The BC Lions have their number, especially offensively, able to put up points, which I think they're going to be able to do. We saw Rourke look comfortable. Andrew just said it as well when he was talking about the matchup of Rourke and the offense versus Edmonton's defense. Rourke started to look comfortable, look like himself of 2022 in the preseason, a short little sample size of what we saw, and that was without guys like Justin McInnis, Keelan Hatcher. I know Stanley Berryhill played. I know Justin McInnis, Javon Couture played. Don't think Aiden Eberhard played. Jermaine Jackson was in the game a little bit. I know he was in the game in Victoria as well. No JB. So I think we're going to see Nathan Rourke, maybe not of 2022, but the Nathan Rourke that I'm expecting to see, of running the offense very crisp. The reason why I think the BC Lions place second in the Western Division, the reason why I think I have the BC Lions winning this game and being successful this season. And the next thing that I obviously just alluded to is JB being back in the BC Lions orange and black. I think JB is going to provide a very valuable weapon in the offense, not only on the ground when it comes to running between the tackles, running hard, setting up that downhill run for Buck Pierce's offense, and then being able to build off that. I think his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield is going to be one that we're going to see on great display this year, with Buck using him similar to the way they're using Brady, right, of the workhorse back. I think the addition of Xander Horvath, I'm curious to see how his workload is managed, his snaps come into play. I think they're going to be able to find him snaps as the kind of H-back, split that kind of reps with a guy like Riley Pickett, who maybe they want to sneak in a guy like Xander Horvath every once in a while, who's probably a touch more athletic, a little bit more smoother, fundamentally probably a little bit more sound in that fullback H-back role, having experience in the NFL playing it. Xander Horvath I'm talking about. So I think Horvath will get some snaps at tailback, but JB will be your workhorse. Not only running the ball but catching the ball as well. And I'm curious to see what happens there. As I mentioned, I'm curious to see Horvath and Riley Pickett's role. I touched on a little bit beforehand, in our previous video of the top 5 storylines of the BC Lions' new secret weapon, the content we posted on our Instagram channel. So go check that out, of Pickett being, targeted on a few catches in the preseason, picking up 2 receptions for 24 yards, if I'm not mistaken. I think Pickett's going to be a sneaky guy to be a short yardage weapon in terms of being a weapon, as I said. So the other thing that I'm looking forward to offensively versus defensively, would be the matchup of Justin McInnis and Keelan Hatcher versus that secondary. I think I like the matchups outside of Trey Ford being in that cornerback position where I think he's going to probably contain. I know more predominantly with Winnipeg, he played to the field. I don't know if they're going to do, put him back in the boundary for Edmonton, if they're going to do a right and left thing in Edmonton. I think either way, they're going to probably limit the production of Aiden Eberhardt, who I'm pretty high on this season, as well as Stanley Berryhill, who I think has some untapped potential, can be a little bit better, but I think will be pushed by a guy like Jermaine Jackson for some reps in the offense. So something to keep an eye on there, I think, is Justin McInnis' ability to affect the game in the slot versus the Edmonton Elks halfbacks, as well as a guy like Keon Hatcher. Keep an eye out for Royce Mitchie, ball hawking in the secondary, who I think will keep a lid on things and maybe limit Rourke from keeping from too much of an air show downfield. But that being said, I think I like that matchup for the BC Lions of attacking the halfbacks of the Edmonton Elks with Justin McInnis and Keon Hatcher in the slot. So to go over to the other side of the matchup of the BC Lions defense versus the Edmonton Elks offense, first and foremost should be talked about all week in the meeting, should be focused all week in practice, is containing Trey Ford. As I mentioned with Andrew, love Trey. I'm rooting for Trey long term to hopefully that he can pan out to be a franchise quarterback in the CFL, whether it's with Edmonton or somewhere else. This week, I hope that he doesn't do so well, or if he does do well, it's in a loss. Containing him should be number one priority at all costs. You should be wanting to keep Trey Ford in the pocket as you kind of are accustomed to. It's the cliches of playing, the Lamar Jacksons, the Kyler Murrays, the Josh Allens. You can even throw in there. Maybe not quite as athletic as those guys, Josh Allen. Although maybe I would say. Jokes aside, we'll save the Bills talk for another video, folks. Although I love to talk about the Bills today. Trey Ford and keeping him in the pocket. We saw in the preseason game him start to escape the pocket a little bit, extend those plays, start to be a little bit of a problem. And I think that'll cause the BC Lions a problem in terms of their secondary still being some question marks of some guys needing to prove themselves, more specifically maybe at that halfback position, at safety with Christophe Boyu. I think the most improvement thing is the pass rush, right? Outside of Matthew Betts, can they get home? And if they're not able to get home and Trey Ford's able to extend the play, that puts more pressure on the secondary to cover for longer. That puts, guys just in tough predicaments to, receivers to break open from coverage, get open for Trey Ford as we saw him, extend the play, receivers break open from coverage in the preseason game, like I said, a few times on Saturday. So or excuse me, on Friday. So hope that doesn't happen first and foremost for the BC Lions defense. I think that is something that the Lions need to nip in the behind if it starts right away. If Trey Ford starting to extend plays, whether it's a spy, whether it's containing rush, containing Trey Ford should be priority number one defensively, and that should maybe tie into. I wonder what the defensive line is going to do production wise for the BC Lions when it comes to a guy like Matthew Betts. Marcus Moore, I think, is a guy that's underrated in this defense. Having a good preseason, I know we banged up a little bit with the poke to the eye, as I think of what we're kind of terming it, or what was talked about on some of the BC Lions content platforms. So expecting him to be a pretty meaningful contributor this year, as well as a guy that's a newcomer like Dwayne Hendricks, who I said on the top five storylines. I think Dwayne Hendricks, along with a guy like Mike, always going to set the tone this year for the Lions defense in terms of bringing that physicality, playing on that, on the edge, not wanting to cross that line of dirty, but also going up to it as far as you can and kind of riding that line of being passive aggressive, being very aggressive, and I think setting a tone physicality wise on the defense. And a guy like Dwayne Hedrick, I think, is going to be a meaningful contributor. How much can he affect Matthew Betts, the other team's quarterback? I think maybe if he can be that Josh Banks type of role would be ideal, where he does a lot of his dirty work unseen on the stat sheet, which is unfortunate to maybe the average fan, but as I said, a lot of the dirty work, he's gonna, put on his hard hat, put on his work boots, grab his lunch pail, and go to work every game day for the BC Lions. I think that's going to be a guy like Dwayne Hendricks. And then you look at the other side, who the Lions are very high on, high enough to, it seems like, bump him over a guy like Christian Covington returning from the NFL, Jonah Tavai, who's going to be starting at that defensive tackle position, as I said, over Christian Covington returning to the CFL last season, not returning, excuse me, returning to BC after a long 10-year you know, tenure in the NFL. So can Jonah Tavai, can Dwayne Hendricks in the interior affect and help a guy like Matthew Betts, and then in turn affect the other team's quarterback, get some pressure, cause havoc inside? We will see. Can a guy like Kemeka Toure, or who it's going to be, in terms of depth, backing up Matthew Betts and what looks to be Kemeka Toure so far, you know, Crawford, or it's going to be, a Canadian that the name escapes me right now, unfortunately, when just doing the depth charts yesterday. I don't know why I still don't have it on here, unfortunately, folks, of media being shared. But a few guys that are in contention to be playing meaningful snaps until Sione Tama gets back, with obviously Juliano Falanaco being released from the roster. The team not really liking what they saw from him in preseason and training camp. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, is being able to affect Trey Ford with the defensive line, who has had plenty of question marks and storylines to be talked about all offseason and going into the season. So the next thing would be to limit uh, Justin Rankin and Javon Leake on the ground. Justin Rankin started to take advantage of the BC Lions on the ground there early on last week in the preseason finale in Edmonton. And it's something that I think the BC Lions probably don't want to see. Excuse me here, folks, as I take a small water break. Usually I do this when Blake is chatting, or our guest, but excuse me for just 1 second. The throat gets a little dry sometimes when talking this long. So when talking about the matchup, limiting Rankin and Leake on the ground, Justin Rankin started to get going in the preseason finale in Edmonton last week, and it's something that I think the Lions were wanting to cut out right away because of what that can do to the defense later in the game, especially when it comes to containing a guy like Trey Ford. When you're having to come downhill so far hard and focus on that run game, that opens up Trey Ford extending plays and even running and the pass game even more. So a danger to unleashing that Edmonton Elks offense, I think, is setting up that Edmonton Elks offense early and allowing them to rush the ball in favorable down and distance. The next matchup, I think, is a favorable one for the Lions in terms of maybe, I'm maybe a little bit higher than some people, I think, on the secondary. I think they're going to be able to prove that they make some plays and are, I think, the outs better than the outside narrative paints them as of now. The secondary versus the Edmonton Elks receiving core. And I think, looking at them right now on paper, obviously they could prove me wrong, but a guy like Steven Dunbar, proven 1,000-yard receiver in the past. That being said, his previous tenure in Edmonton didn't go over so well. I question whether or not he's going to transition well, although we saw him, connect on a beautiful pass to Trey Ford in the preseason. As I said, proven 1,000-yard guy in the past with Hamilton. Can he transition into Edmonton for his second stint? We will see. Of course, a guy like Hurley Gittens, who they paid to potentially be a number one ratio breaking Canadian receiver, think he quietly had himself a pretty good season last season, although dealing with some injuries and stuff like that. Just under 1,000 yards. I think folks kind of forgot a little bit about Curly Gittens Jr. and the maybe pace trajectory is the word actually I'm looking for. Um, that Curly Gittens' career was off to early on in his career, and I think with the additions of, or the kind of emergence of Phil Pod and McInnes and stuff like that, maybe quieted him down. Emilus even as well quieted, Gittens' production over the last number of seasons a little bit. Question whether or not he can get back to his full capabilities, although, I am rooting for him as a Canadian receiver to get back to that level of play. He was, arguably one of the better prospects coming out for his, last few years of Canadian receivers. And that's saying something of the guys that have came out of U Sports and got drafted at the receiver position. Then you look at another Canadian receiver in Keon Julian Grant coming over from Montreal, getting paid by Edmonton in the offseason. What can he do in the green and gold? We will see alongside Trey Ford. Can they form some Canadian connection? Can they kind of form that? There's three names there that are kind of proven guys in the league, can show that they are a three-headed, maybe not monster, but, forced to be reckoned with in the league. Very capable weapons for Trey Ford. I think I'm a little bit more down on them than maybe Edmonton fans, or maybe even I should be, especially with the two Canadians starting. But I still think I have some question marks in terms of those guys staying healthy long term, being productive long term, and wanting to see another season of it, or just the first season, I guess, in general, of Trey Ford being the guy, with obviously Curly Gittens kind of having some success with Ford, as well as MBT and others in the past with Edmonton. So something else to keep an eye on as well there is the BC Lions defense, obviously with Gary Peters manning the corner position as he always does. As I talked about with the um, in the storylines to follow, the depth chart reaction, Gary Peters is going to man that boundary cornerback position. Now, whether Deontay Williams starts at the field or left cornerback position is one thing, because things are going to shift around quite a bit. If so, Gary Peters will be the right corner. Deontay Williams will be the left corner. Things won't change if it goes to boundary or field. They'll just stay as right and left. If Deontay goes into play the nickel or Sam linebacker position, things will shift to, I would imagine, Gary Peters playing the boundary predominantly, and somebody else, whoever's playing that corner, possibly Jalen Edwards Cooper, will be the left. Although it could be just that way altogether. Although Jalen Edwards Cooper playing left struggled last year, I know they have done that in the past with Gary Peters going just right predominantly. So I would expect that just to happen this year. Gary Peters being right corner, whoever's playing left will be left, and then in the slot we still have unproven guys like probably as of now looks like to be Ronald Kent and Robert Carter Jr. potentially, as well as I don't know why I'm forgetting the name of who um, should be starting at the other halfback position right now, folks. Forgive me as I'm going to try to go find it really quickly on our previous videos. I don't know why I don't have it screenshotted. So sorry, that should be confusing myself here with all the names without paper in front of me. But Jalen Edwards Cooper, if he doesn't have to slide over to that cornerback position, is going to play in the boundary at halfback, a new position to him, having previously played corner, and then Ronald Kent Jr. having played the field halfback position, and or Robert Carter can be in contention for snaps as well. Something to keep an eye out, of course, as I said, the matchup with the Elks receivers, kind of a battle of maybe not unprovens per se, but a battle of some question marks for both teams. So that's kind of the battle for the BC Lions offense versus the Edmonton Elks defense, and then as well the BC Lions defense, Edmonton Elks offense. So before we close out, folks, kind of for you guys to get accustomed to, timing and what to expect on a weekly basis, as I said, we'll be on here for about an hour matchup show every week where we'll jump on, we'll give our initial thoughts on the matchup for about 10 or so minutes, 10, 15 minutes before our guests join us. Our guests will join us for about 15, 20 minutes. That'll be about half the show. For the other half of the show, we'll do what we just did right there, is we'll break down the matchups of offense versus defense and the defense versus offense. Quickly before I actually get too far ahead of myself and out of here, we will touch on special teams, I guess, from the Lions' perspective, because there is a little bit of some new things, I guess, to talk about before we get out of here. But I said this portion of the show will be Blake's 3 keys to the game, and as I said, we will also talk about the BC Lions injury report, depth charts throughout the season as they come along, because we are recording earlier this week than expected, which is schedules not working out to record a little bit closer to the day we want to upload the video. So before I get too far ahead of myself, special teams, Sean White, Mr. Automatic, coming back. Not too much more to be said about Sean White. I think the only thing to be said is, when will the cliff come? When will he fall off the cliff? When will he start to decline? I don't expect that to be this season. I expect Sean to be kicking for a few more seasons at a high level before that starts to come, especially the way we've seen him start to take care of his body, be motivated with his child, start the birth of his child. So expecting Mr. Automatic to be Mr. Automatic once again this season. We do have a new punter, a new starting punter, quickly to talk about. For the brand, folks, of course, we're going to talk about our specialist with Carl Myers, punter who was on the practice roster last season, taking over full time after being, mentored, I guess you could say, by previous starter Stefan Flintoff, who was released in the offseason or just not re-signed to the team. Carl Myers, Australian rugby, Australian football experience, pro experience, transitioning over to football last season, is going to get the job with, not a lot of experience on his hand. And I think there's a lot of good to expect, especially we saw him with a booming, it was about a 70-yard punt down in Victoria. It was an absolute field flipper. there's going to, I think, be some really good that comes with his outstanding punts. Can he be consistent throughout an 18-game season? Can he be consistent in the big moments when it comes to maybe a playoff game or a big game of, does the moment get too big for him? Does he maybe shank one off the leg and it goes for, a 20-yard net punt? That'll be something I'm monitoring in terms of Carl Myers. The other one is returning long snapper Kyle Nelson. Obviously, we still have Riley Pickett, who is kind of the backup long snapper with just long snapping experience, who, if they maybe don't want to address Kyle Nelson in terms of what the roster looks like on game day, they also can throw Riley Pickett, who has long snapping experience in there as well, who'll be more than likely on the active roster. And then Jermaine Jackson, as I've talked about a few times, will be likely the kick returner for game number 1 and throughout the regular season, unless otherwise. And a name, folks, that I would say is one to pay attention to and keep an eye on. Jermaine Jackson should be wearing number 14 this season in your lucky number program. So before we get out of here, folks, if you guys enjoyed today's video, our guest Andrew Hoskins jumping on here to preview and give you guys our first matchup show of the season. Please feel free to leave a like on the video, comment down below how you guys are feeling about the matchup number 1, comment down below if you guys liked the guest, if you guys actually, you guys are better like the guest, because Andrew is so good to us, number 1, and Andrew is such a kind human being, a great individual. Comment down below what you loved so much about our segment with Andrew, what you guys are maybe hopeful on the Edmonton Elks. I know there's some BC Lions fans that are probably listening to this like, Cole, you're crazy. This is a Lions preview show. But that being said, we should all be CFL fans at heart, and maybe not number 1, but number 2 should be, to be fans of the league and supporters of the league. Seeing a great product on the field only helps things and elevates the league as a whole. And then, of course, subscribe to the channel. Over 75% of you guys are unsubscribed. It goes a long way to helping us out here on the channel, grow things. So please subscribe. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys will get notified every single time we upload a video, which there has been a ton lately. You guys will be also reminded when we go live on the channel, etc. You guys will get a reminder when it happens here on the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And of course, you guys can find us on our social media platforms at Canadian Football Fanatics, as well as on Twitter at _CF Fanatics. So my 3 keys to the game before we get out of here, all cliche as heck, especially because this is going to be Blake's job throughout the season. First and foremost, maybe not the most cliche because it's kind of a unique thing to the BC Lions, but number 1 is to take advantage of the energy and atmosphere that's in the building in BC Place. It should be about 50,000 rocking. Take advantage, jump all over the Edmonton Elks, who should have doubt, or maybe not should have doubt, because this is a new regime, new voice in the locker room, you would hope, if you're the Edmonton Elks fans, but put that doubt into their mind very early on of some of those guys that have been long holdovers or veterans in Edmonton of, oh boy, here we go again, hearing that concert kickoff, and then the Lions starting to jump all over them again. Put the doubt in them early. Take advantage of the energy in BC Place early on. Number 2 is win the battle at the line of scrimmage. As I mentioned, cliche as heck, yes, but with the additions of Edmonton, as I said, the strength, I think, will be the line of scrimmage for Edmonton in this matchup. The strength will go to them for sure. The question marks still remain for the BC Lions on both sides of the line of scrimmage, on offense and defense. Can they prove that they are legitimate enough for the BC Lions to not only maybe make a run to the Grey Cup, but be good enough for Nathan Rourke to not let them down long term, for them to be in a playoff spot, to even just get a chance, get a ticket to the dance is all they're asking long term. When you look at long term goals for this season, you can't win the Grey Cup without a chance. You can't get a chance without getting into the playoffs. Get an opportunity, punch your ticket to the dance, whether you're number 1 seed or 3, and anything can happen whether getting to the Grey Cup. So punch your ticket to the dance. Will the BC Lions line of scrimmage allow them to do so? I think is a big question mark, and my key number 2 to getting victory number 1 for the BC Lions. Key number 3 is win the turnover battle, something that I think Nathan Rourke needs to do better at than we saw him last season, or the tail end of last season. No fault to his own, just obviously with expectations and maybe pressure, sometimes to a fault, wanting to force things and seeing things obviously out of his control, with obviously the William Stanback interception, with bobbling it up and popping it up into the air. We see things that happen that are weird all the time in football. Bounces don't go your way. I think Nathan Rourke will do a good job of taking care of the football. On the other side of things, can the BC Lions defense do a good job of taking away the football? I think it's something they have to do a much better job at this season. And if they lead the league or around the league leaders in terms of taking care of the way of the football, I think will go a long way to the success of this season for the BC Lions. So that's going to do it for our first matchup show of the week, of the year, I should say, folks. It's going to be a fun 2025 season. You guys will be able to find us every week here on the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. As I said, like the video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel. You guys will be able to find our matchup shows every week featuring a guest of the opponent of the BC Lions and then a post-game show, if not the night of or the afternoon, whatever it may be in terms of time of the game. The night of, following the game, you guys will get it the morning of. It'll be uploaded to you guys on your YouTube channel for you guys to consume and enjoy. So stick around, folks. As I said, subscribe to the channel is the best way to jump on board, buckle up, and hang on for the ride because it's going to be a long season. I'm very excited. But as of now, we are at the start of the tunnel, and I can't see that light at the end of the tunnel quite yet. But as I said, buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride throughout the CFL season. We appreciate you guys for tuning in to another video here on the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.